Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 1st of November 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we will be joined by live video Skype link by Mark Anderson from American Free Press. Well, the weather's pretty good here in Plymouth. We've still got quite a lot of blue sky. It is pretty chilly, though. Leaves are still looking wonderful. And reports across the country are mainly that it's nice but cool, cold, chilly in some places. Winter draws on.
Right, we're going to start off with Mark, and we mentioned this briefly yesterday, I think. James Comey, the head of the FBI, resignation letters piling up from disaffected FBI agents is the allegation, according to the Daily Mail here. Mark, what's the latest on this FBI situation with Hillary?
What this article talks about, of course, is that James Comey, the head of the U.S. FBI, reportedly and mainly reopened the email investigation against Hillary Clinton because fellow FBI agents, his underlings, were threatening to resign, and actual resignation letters were reportedly piling up on his desk. This is according to the Daily Mail. Ed Klein wrote this article. He's an author of Guilty as Sin. He's written several books, I understand, about the Clintons. That's the basic narrative. What I've been working on for American Free Press and what I'm extrapolating out of this, and I think this is important, is that with another email bomb dropping on Hillary and all these other allegations up to this point, Donald Trump, if he wins the election Tuesday, November 8th, maybe it's not a big deal. But if he loses the election Tuesday, November 8th, especially by a wide margin, amid all these scandals further tarnishing Hillary Clinton, he'll have every justification to challenge the election outcome. He'll be able to say, how can this be? With all we have and with a renewed investigation, and with Fox News, to their credit, correctly saying that Comey wouldn't do this purely from peer pressure or from pressure within the FBI. He would have to have some substance to even raise the issue again. Meanwhile, Hillary's calling it simply a way to disrupt the elections. Maybe the timing can't be helped, and I think she's off base on that. At any rate, to draw the line out further, what I'm saying is that now that Trump will have justification for this, another thing that we're looking for, especially us in the alternative media, is if Hillary wins despite all these latest bombshells, this is going to put, and even Fox News was sort of admitting this half-heartedly last night, this is going to put the U.S. mainstream media in a real quandary because more and more people, Trump supporters and others, will see the media as having enabled Hillary despite her known criminality, despite her known felonies or alleged felonies. And so a major stain, a major bruise against the mainstream media is looking more and more likely here. And in parallel with that, the electronic voting machine fraud, the Texas vote flipping came out. Trump tweeted millions of people about the Texas vote flipping, and Matt Drudge had an article published very recently showing electronic vote fraud, the very thing that I've been pushing, then vote scam expert Jim Condit Jr. of Ohio has been pushing. So what we're hoping, drawing a line out of this latest FBI thing, is that the U.S. media and the electronic election, robot election, that whole regime will come under intense fire. And that is a systemic thing. That's not just a person like Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. That's a systemic thing. And this is what we who have been working so hard to expose these things, this is what we're hoping for, and we're seeing some evidence that that might happen.
Well, I forgot to put the article in the graphics today, but the Hill is a Washington D.C. based journal. It's a serious journal, is it, Mark?
Yeah, I read it on Capitol Hill when I go there. They do a respectable job, yes.
Okay, so they have an article entitled "Clinton Foundation Memo Reveals Bill and Hillary as Partners in Crime." This goes way beyond, it's perhaps not as serious from a national security standpoint as the email situation, but what they're talking about is the sort of mix between Clinton Foundation activities and Bill Clinton Inc. activities. Of course, Clinton Foundation, supposed to be a charitable foundation, Bill Clinton Inc., a for-profit organization, that these organizations are mixing their activities, that they're receiving money from big corporations like Coca-Cola, and in fact from banks like UBS, for example, is the one that they cite here. And they're really saying that, aside from any FBI investigation on the email situation, there should be an IRS investigation in the activities of these companies and these organizations. And they're also alleging that while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, that she was being actively lobbied by these companies that were at the same time giving the Clinton Foundation and Bill Clinton Inc. Donations. So, it goes beyond just the email situation. Her past seems to be catching up in many ways.
Yes, Bill Clinton Inc. is not a household word like the Clinton Foundation is, and like the general discussion of the emails is. That's a very good point, Mike. Here we have this new kid on the block, Bill Clinton Inc. Now we have something new, something fresh. It's not as worn out as the email chatter back and forth by the pundits. And that's an excellent point. That is yet another, as if we needed another, way to see the Clintons as extremely damaged goods. They've had their day in the sun. Whatever one might think of Donald Trump, and I'm not saying he's an angel, he's got some explaining to do about certain things in his financial past and his business practices. Overall, though, he's won a lot of hearts and minds of the people for good or ill. But nevertheless, the Clintons are beyond the pale. So if they get elected, it's going to show that Donald Trump was right. You would have to have a rigged media, a totally biased and compromised media to get people like this in office in the first place. And so the challenge against the media and the election regime and their robotic voting machines, it's right on the cusp. It has to happen. We need to look at the system beyond the candidates. That is the critical thing here.
Excuse me, Mark, somebody just pointed out in our chat room that, of course, electoral fraud was what the US and the UK, they were pointing fingers at the Eastern Bloc countries, saying that, of course, the former Soviet, these Soviet influenced countries, they were corrupt, they didn't have a proper voting system. We had to help them get in and restore or reinstate democracy, and that including voting. So that attack, of course, on the Russians was incredibly strong. And now we're seeing it's not only the US, because, of course, here in UK, we've also seen time and time again evidence of fraud in the elections. But somebody pointing out there that it's pot calling the kettle black over this stuff.
That's a good point, too. I just want to add that, to kind of complete my thoughts on this very briefly, what Hillary Clinton did with the emails was wrong in principle just by having multiple private servers for public business as Secretary of State. The content of the emails, important though it is, very important, is secondary to the fact that she used private servers to begin with. That alone should have disqualified her from office when she was Secretary of State, and that should continue to disqualify her from office now as she's running for president. If you took your laptop computer and you worked at a bank and you put a few people's bank accounts on your personal laptop, you'd be fired simply for using your private computer for your job. It wouldn't be so much what was on your computer, it'd be just the fact that you did that. And that's what people got to keep in mind. The content of the emails is secondary to the fact that there was tremendous misconduct in the mere existence of these private servers.
Yeah, indeed. The response from the Clinton campaign is a bit sad, a bit lame, perhaps. A veteran spy alleges Russia tried to woo Trump by bring down U.S. democracy as independent. But the story seems to have originated with the Mother Jones website. And they're saying that Russia spent 5 years trying to cultivate Donald Trump as an asset in a bid to undermine Western democracy, according to some extraordinary claims made by a veteran of the spying community. And what Mother Jones is saying, that this is a former senior intelligence officer for a Western country, they don't specify who, someone who specialized in Russian counterintelligence. And he says that in recent months he had provided the FBI with memos based on recent interactions with Russian sources, contending that Russian government has for years tried to co-opt and assist Trump, and that the FBI requested more information on that. This is a bit lame. They get to attack Russia, they get to attack Trump all at the same time.
It's desperation, Mike. I think.
I think that's right. Any thoughts on that?
Right out of the starting gate, not a lot, except to say that it seems to be a tactic to try and include Trump in the look. He's involved in undermining the system or quasi criminality, just like Hillary is, and kind of trying to get him tarnished in the same way, although not as much. If it is a tactic, that's clearly what they're trying to do. But, it's the Western establishment that has named Russia as an enemy. Russia has not actually proven itself to be an outright adversary of the West or the U.S. The Western think tanks and the Western intelligentsia has decided or decreed that Russia is an enemy. And ironically, you'd almost wouldn't blame Vladimir Putin for wanting to have some insight into U.S. elections, because he's going to have to deal with the next U.S. president for the next 4 or 8 years. So it's all a question, is Russia an enemy to begin with? I don't think they've proven their case, although I wouldn't call the Russian state a utopia or a perfect situation. But that's really what it's based on. They're trying to convince us Russia's this enemy, and therefore Donald Trump is guilty by association. But they've never proven that Russia is an actual foe to begin with.
Indeed, we'll come on to more of that in a second. Let's look at the United Nations and Syria here. This is Matthew Rycroft, who's the UK ambassador to the United Nations. Security Council unanimously adopted Resolution 2314 yesterday, which extends, they say, the mandate of joint investigative mechanism identifying perpetrators using chemical weapons in Syria. So they extended that until the 18th of November. They say through the unanimous adoption of Resolution 2314, a 15-nation council expressed its intention to consider a further extension before the 2-week extension expired. This is like Yes, Minister. It's the language is incredible. They said that they were stressing the need for full functioning of the mechanism during that period, condemning against, in the strongest terms, the use of any toxic chemical as a weapon in Syria, and expressing alarm that civilians continue to be killed and injured because of such use. And Rycroft said the United Kingdom welcomes the unanimous adoption of Resolution 2314 today. The short-term extension of the joint investigative mechanism is required to allow additional time for the Council to continue our consultations on a full renewal of the JIM for another year. And then he went on to say, thanks to the JIM's hard work, we know without doubt that who is responsible for killing and maiming civilians in Syria with chemical weapons. It's now been conclusively demonstrated that both the Assad regime and Daesh have used chemical weapons against civilians in Syria. These weapons continue to be used in flagrant violation of international norms and laws, and at complete odds with basic human decency. Well, of course, that hasn't quite been shown, but anyway, we'll let him off with that, perhaps. I agree. So this was it, but this was the key point, I thought. I agree with Russia that we should improve the joint investigation mechanism, and that we should refrain from politicizing it, and that there needs to be action including against any use of chemical weapons by non-state actors. So Russia, obviously, on the Security Council, they have agreed to extend this mechanism, which on the face of it might seem a bit strange since they support the Assad regime, but actually what they're expecting is that the mechanism will continue to expose the use of chemical weapons by Western-backed terrorists. Now, in the meantime, the Russians themselves have been commenting on the fact that the bombing of eastern Aleppo has now been stopped for 16 days. They originally said this was going to be a 24-hour ceasefire, but it's gone on for 16 days. They said, however, that more than 2,000 moderate rebels, in inverted commas, had been shelling the west of the city, using 22 battle tanks, 15 infantry fighting vehicles, 8 jihad mobiles, I guess those are Toyota trucks or something, and rocket artillery. So this was according to Sergei Shoigu, who's the defense minister. He said most of the militants' vehicles have been destroyed, and he said, "Is this the opposition with which is possible to negotiate. So he's really asking the question. They have stopped their bombing, but the opposition, ISIS in other words, and al-Nusra Front continues. So that's the situation in Aleppo at the moment and what the United Nations is doing about it. But then Matthew Rycroft once again had to get something in, this time about Yemen, yesterday at the Security Council. So he made a statement and he said the sheer scale of the crisis facing the people of Yemen means that there can be no let up in our efforts. Our efforts to do what? Well, this is a very interesting point. He said it's a political crisis, a humanitarian crisis, a crisis where the violence simply won't end. Well, perhaps it would end if we stopped giving the weapons to Saudi Arabia, but that's another issue.
And choosing their targets, of course.
Well, exactly, helping them target. So as a result, he said civilians continue to suffer, with over 14 million people now food insecure and over 21 million people in need of humanitarian assistance. This is the tragic cost of the ongoing conflict in Yemen. And he went on to criticize the Yemeni people for attacking Saudi Arabia. But he also said, we immediately underlined our deep concerns at ministerial level with the Saudi government over the attack on the funeral. Over 140 people died that day, he said. But he went on to point out that, of course, it was all fine because the coalition's joint incidents assessment team is a positive step towards resolving that issue. And of course, that is Saudi Arabia effectively investigating itself. Sorry, but it doesn't end there because, sorry, I've jumped on too far, because Saudi Arabia has appointed a Bahraini judge who was involved in supporting, is it too strong to say, supporting torture in Bahrain during the so-called Arab Spring there. He's been appointed to investigate the alleged war crimes in Yemen. And this is Mansour al-Mansour, presided over the prosecutions of hundreds of peaceful protesters, according to various mainstream commentaries today. So we continue to investigate ourselves, it seems.
Well, you get the best outcome from that sort of thing, Mike.
What do you do?
Saves any concern. We'll see another example later in the news.
Yes. Well, we saw this one a bit soon. We mentioned it yesterday. This was just putting this back up just for you, Mark, because John Kerry was in London yesterday, and where he was received the Chatham House Prize. And this was apparently for the work that he did over the Iranian nuclear deal. But he was also meeting Boris Johnson and a number of other people yesterday to discuss Libya. So they met with representatives of several countries. They said that, France, Italy, UAE, Saudi Arabia, all meeting to discuss Libya. I'm not quite sure what Saudi Arabia has to do with that. But what really struck me was, along with the US Secretary of State, John Kerry, Boris Johnson says, I have co-hosted a productive meeting with international partners to discuss Libya's economic challenges and how to support the implementation of the Libyan political agreement. So this is the future government of Libya. But he also went on to say that really what they needed to do was to build safe infrastructure, secure infrastructure, that they needed to deliver public services. Electricity in homes and cash in banks is what they intend to deliver for the benefit of all Libyans.
So all the things that were there before we utterly destroyed the country.
Correct. Now, of course, we're not paying for that. We're not paying for that. They have to pay for it themselves. We destroy it and they pick up the pieces.
Yeah, brilliant. They've brought Common Purpose in, EU funded, to help train their future leaders in the Libyan civil service. So I think the country will be transforming quite quickly.
Absolutely. Now, Mark, last week, was it you were at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs?
Yes, I covered the John Kerry speech and the populism conference 2 days before that.
Right, but so you wanted us to show a short video clip introducing this organization. So let's watch this and then we'll discuss it.
This is a really unusual election year. For the first time in decades, a major presidential contender is challenging the traditional U.S. foreign policy that's been in place for more than 70 years. The 2016 Chicago Council Survey on American Public Opinion questioned more than 2,000 Americans. Results show that anxieties about immigration and trade are key to Donald Trump's political success. 16% of respondents selected Donald Trump as their top choice for president among a list of primary candidates. Among these core Trump supporters, 80% see immigration as a critical threat, compared to 27% of Democrats, 40% of independents, and 67% of Republicans. And just 49% see globalization as mostly good for the United States, compared to 74% of Democrats, 61% of independents, and 59% of Republicans. But these concerns are not new. Since 1998, a majority of Republicans have said that immigration is a threat to the United States. And since 2008, Republicans have expressed more negative views on globalization and trade. Overall, these views represent only a minority among the American public. 43% of Americans see immigration as a threat, and 65% of Americans say that globalization is mostly good. But concerns about immigration and trade have grown more prominent in this election, and whoever becomes the next president will have to address these concerns.
So that's wonderful, Mark. I'm really glad I knew that. That's how many people live in the United States? 200 million, and they surveyed 2,000.
Well, 350 million, 200 million might be the adult population. There's 10 times as many people in the US as there is in Canada. You know, if that were a dartboard, I'd be hitting everyone right in the middle here. I'd be getting a 100% score. Let me just comment a little bit about what she said, that we have this candidate, she said, Donald J. Trump is who she met, who for the first time is threatening the world order that we've had for the last 70 years. She means the post-World War II Bretton Woods liberal democratic world order that Anders Rasmussen talked about when I covered the CCGA meeting that he spoke at October 18th. What we're looking at here, and what I'm starting to write up for American Free Press, is they view the post-World War II order as a constitution of sorts. You got the IMF out of that. You got the World Bank. You got the International Trade Organization that became the World Trade Organization. And then she talks about immigration and free trade. All of this is a marriage of economics and politics with corporations leading the way, and it's a constitution of sorts. So the CCGA, the Chicago Council, is very concerned in a sort of muted fashion, a veiled fashion, that Trump appears to be challenging. How dare he challenge the post-World War II Bretton Woods world order, the new constitution of the ages that Bilderberg helps nurse along once a year. And then she goes on to say that you'll notice in the clip that she says Republicans believe this, but Trump supporters believe that. She doesn't say that most Trump supporters are basically Republicans. They're not separate from Republicans. They're just part of the Republican rank and file. It's the establishment, the Republicans that want free trade. It's the establishment Republicans that want an interventionist foreign policy. They're the minority. It's just that they have more influence in the media and more financial muscle. So there's that strange dichotomy that they make, calling Trump supporters non-Republicans when most of them are basically grassroots rank and file Republicans, along with a few independents mixed in, but then they have a separate category for independents. And like you say, Mike, they only interviewed 2,000 people out of an adult population in America of at least 175, 200 million. The voting age is probably somewhere around there, the voting age population. And then they say that the Trump people are anti-immigration. They're not anti-immigration, they're anti-unrestrained immigration. There's no qualifiers put on immigration. They act like that people don't want any immigration, that no one would cross the border in the language that they use, which is manifestly and categorically untrue. That a lot of people skeptical of immigration just want far better regulations. There would still be immigration. They don't want illegal immigration, at least not in such large numbers. So although this sounds intelligent, this CCGA video, it's largely just a throwaway item, a dartboard for those that know better.
Well, and indeed that immigration point is exactly the same debate which is going on in this country over Brexit.
Yeah, indeed. But the delivery of that little video clip is classic, because it could be any of the change agents, any of the so-called third sector in UK that are pushing this stuff, whether it's Chatham House or the Young Foundation. There's hundreds of these organisations. They always call themselves independent. They're not, but they produce this very polished, very nice sort of publicity to prove their point. The music, I did enjoy the music in that little clip. I thought it was very uplifting. It made me feel good.
I'll just add that in Kerry's speech, he echoed the same things and went on and on speaking as if he were U.S. Trade Representative Michael Froman. He only spoke sparingly about diplomacy, even though he's the top diplomat as Secretary of State for the U.S. And then he went on sounding like a war cabinet member, declaring war on Daesh, the terrorist outfit that's sort of a renamed ISIS, as I understand it, because officials don't want to dignify ISIS by calling them the Islamic State because they're supposedly a non-state actor. We won't talk about Western intelligence backing ISIS clandestinely. We'll leave that off the table for now. But Kerry sounded more like a trade representative and a war cabinet member than a diplomat, although he announced yesterday's meeting that he was going to in London, where that you guys have already touched upon. But I'll just mention that Kerry said, quote, "If we were to see the Trans-Pacific Partnership rejected, it'd be a giant self-inflicted wound on our nation," he said with noted pomposity, I might add. And then, quote, "and our credibility as a country and with any country with which we're trying to negotiate would be in doubt." You know, this beaming kind of quote where he's making it sound like the TPP, if rejected, will, you know, the sun will refuse to shine, rivers will run backwards, water will no longer be liquid. I mean, and he went on. They might as well have had the U.S. Trade Representative there instead of Kerry. And what they're really trying to do is push the Trans-Pacific Partnership right after the November 8 elections, after everybody is burnt out on Hillary and Trump and the smoke is clearing. People are tired of thinking about politics. They're going to try and push this through because that's part of that post-World War II Bretton Woods world order, and they want it, and they're going to get it, and we got to pay attention so they don't get it.
Well, just before we move on from the council, the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, you obviously went to see Anders Fogh Rasmussen's talk. We'd hoped that you would get to see Sir Richard Sheriff. But before we talk about Sir Richard Sheriff, I'm just going to show a little snapshot from his talk to the council, because I'll just tell you, it was called Road to War, Russia, NATO, and the Threat of Inaction. So just have a look at this.
Effectively, therefore, by his actions, Putin has ripped up the post-Cold War settlement of Europe. And that was a settlement based as much as anything on working with Russia as a strategic partner. So any thoughts, I'm afraid, of Russia as a strategic partner are now gone. And in the words of a man that many of you will know and respect, as I do, Ambassador Sandy Vershbow, who's just stepped down as the Deputy Secretary General to NATO, Russia is now de facto a strategic adversary. And that threat continues to ratchet. Now, I wrote the book in 2015, between about May and December was the real sort of burst of the major mother of all essay crises, as I call it. And actually, I would say that since then, that ratchet of the threat just goes on clicking up relentlessly.
So this guy's off his head.
Unbelievably dangerous. Mike, we get a clue by the book. I wrote the book.
Yes.
This is here's the ego pushing through, and he rushed to write a book. It caused a crisis for him, but now he's going to quote the book as this is further evidence of what the Russians are doing. This is the hypnotic language, the newspeak. This will be a future leader pontificating over stuff which is not real, in my opinion.
What are your thoughts on the man, Mark?
He's standing on the shoulders of Rasmussen. Rasmussen, of course, reiterated that Americans must never hesitate, even for a nanosecond, to be the world's policeman. And whether we like it or not, was Rasmussen's actual words, speaking to the American people through the council program on October 18th. The U.S. must police the world, whether Americans like it or not. But to do that, the threat of international terrorism may not be enough of an enemy. We may need other boogeymen. So we have to ratchet up the Russian enemy, at least the imagery of a Russian enemy. And yes, Russia's a powerful country. Yes, they probably have certain designs on the West, but I think they're largely, if not totally, defensive. Russia seems much more interested in its own sovereignty than any kind of hegemony. NATO has exercises on an almost continual basis right at or near the Russian border, even though Rasmussen told us NATO's not trying to encircle Russia. NATO's never had any designs on Russia. That's almost an exact quote. But NATO keeps enlarging itself. They claim they asked Russia a long time ago to join NATO, and Russia refused. We don't know how true that is or what the details are, but the fact is that NATO has shown every sign of enlargement, encirclement, and everything that if Russia were doing it the other direction, we'd be screaming bloody murder. So Mr. Sheriff may be trying to sell books and sound important, but I just don't think he's accurate, and he's certainly not making a strong case at any rate.
Yeah. Well, anybody that wants his book, it's called 2017, War with Russia, an urgent warning from senior military command. So maybe you want to ask the library to get that, because I doubt you want to give him any of your money. But anyway, let's move on to the Commonwealth, because the Commonwealth, we've been arguing for quite some time, is absolutely part and parcel of the road towards global governance. Well, they have been looking at climate change towards this end, and they want to reverse it, of course. And so they're saying, can cities designed to mimic the carbon-reducing capability of trees help reverse the effects of climate change? This was what they were asking. And so they were holding the Commonwealth's Regenerative Development to Reverse Climate Change workshop on the 20th and 29th. And this was just in the lead into more climate talks internationally. It was organised by the Baroness Scotland, of course, and the Commonwealth Secretariat. And what did she have to say? Well, she said, this is not the stuff of fairy tales. Architects are already using the grand design of the life-giving arteries and leaves in the structure of trees and in the human lungs to create safer, more environmentally friendly buildings.
So I'm just chuckling, Mike, because these people are in a reality which is not our reality. They are in La La Land. Yes. And the dangerous thing is they don't realise it. Well, they don't care.
Indeed. And she said there are many viable solutions that have not been fully explored, so we can tap into the power of volcanic hot springs for electricity. There is already a functioning geothermal power. So it goes on. I mean, the amazing ecosystems in these marshes, mangroves, and seagrasses are helping us to capture and safely store carbon. You know, if they really believe this nonsense about carbon dioxide, surely the thing to do is to simply grow a few trees. But anyway, this was the meeting. There you go. And it, as you said, scheduled for just a couple of days before the International Climate Change Conference, COP22, which is taking place in Marrakesh. This workshop was considering the potential for a climate change reversal lab in 2017. We need to find a way to impress upon everyone the urgency of tackling this challenge, said Baroness Scotland. The Earth's lung is essentially at risk of terminal cancer because of the choices we have made. If it dies, so do we. The decision to stop destroying what is keeping us alive is firmly in our hands. Well, if that's true, then perhaps we might say the Commonwealth. It's the Commonwealth which is metastasizing the cancer. But anyway, let's not leave the Commonwealth just yet, because even better news. They have just launched the Prince's Trust International, Brian. Yeah. So this is the Commonwealth with more global governance, this time global leadership, of course, and particularly targeting the youth. Prince's Trust International, a newly established charity aiming to support youth employment, education and training, is set to deliver immense benefits to young people in Commonwealth countries, they say. It received its UK launch last night at a reception in London, co-hosted by Baroness Scotland, who welcomed the drive, dynamism and innovation the charity will bring to the youth development sector. Well, what did she have to say about this? She said the Prince's Trust International is now set to capitalise on the strategic links of the Commonwealth and our inbuilt advantages as a network of networks.
Yeah, there's the terminology. That's it, isn't it? That's common purpose, basically. That is the common purpose coming through.
Absolutely.
Cultural intelligence networks.
Right. Well, she joined Lloyd Dorfman, who chairs both Prince's Trust and Prince's Trust International, along with youth leaders, representatives of the City of London for some reason, and this was launched at the Guildhall. So the charity will work in partnership with governments, NGOs and corporations to tackle youth disengagement. So there we go.
And we just remind people it was Baroness Ainley, is that the correct name?
No, she's Baroness
no, who was busy saying that we're going to reduce world temperatures by 0.5 degree by the year 2100.
Yes.
So they're so accurate in what they can do. They're going to reduce world temperatures by 0.5 degree by 2100, and they know that.
Yes.
Yes. Well, let's move.
Yeah.
Can't stop laughing at this, but it is real. This is what these people are coming out with. Let's jump from the Commonwealth, where we, the British, are going to sort the world out by working through all of the Commonwealth countries, to what's in store for UK. And that, of course, is that Britain is to be completely broken up into regions which are going to be pitted against each other. London, of course, is already very, very close to being the city region and no longer our capital city. But it took a local paper to start warning what's really coming. So here's Plymouth's The Herald. And the article is "Bid to defeat merger of Devon and Cornwall to be set out at a council meeting." Now, this is quite an extraordinary event, but basically the plan is that parts of Devon and Cornwall are effectively to be merged. This is the expression Devon Wall. They're going to change the constituency boundaries in some areas, and the government is saying, well, don't worry about it, because, of course, it's going to make more sense financially, economically. We don't care that people are slightly different in those areas. Just do as the government says. So what we say is we're not surprised at all, because this is about the further breakup of UK and its societies. But we're very interested to see the comments from this man, Cornwall Councillor Bert Biscoe. Now, this man's been very, very outspoken, and he was originally, when he was one of the lead people pushing for effectively independence for Cornwall, or at least Cornwall as an independent nation state. But in this recent trouble, he's come out with some very interesting statements. This is part of a video clip that the Herald showed, in which he says both sides of the border, that's the Cornwall-Devon border, don't want to see this petty revision of the borders. Now, I'd pick up on him here in that he's saying it's petty. This is not petty at all, because it's the thin end of the wedge to break up historic and well-established communities. But this was the bit that caught my eye. He said, imperative on the British Isles that it is unified and speaking with one voice. I'll just put that in slightly different words. It's imperative in the British Isles that we are unified and speaking with one voice. And I thought, how remarkable that the man who's campaigned for an independent Cornwall is now beginning to see that the way to have a proper defence against what the British government is doing is to say, if we're on these islands, living in these islands, we've all got to work together. But we'd like to say to Mr. Bert Biscoe, well, don't worry, because the Boundary Commission you want to take to court is independent. How do I know that? Because they say so. Here's what they say on their website. We're an independent and impartial advisory public body which reviews the boundaries of parliamentary constituencies in England. So don't worry, Mike, it's independent. And let's have a look and see how independent it is. So here's the chairman of the commission, who just happens to be the Speaker of the House of Commons, clearly independent. And he is independent because he doesn't take any part at all, nothing in the work of this commission.
So the chairman doesn't do anything?
No, he doesn't do anything, because otherwise it wouldn't be independent.
So why do they have a chairman?
I don't know, but let's show you how independent it is, because all the work is done by the deputy chair of the commission, who has to be a serving High Court judge, and that judge at the moment is Mrs. Justice Patterson. Now, we know that she's independent because she's directly appointed by the Lord Chancellor, who at the moment is Elizabeth Truss.
MP.
So you get the impression that this is clearly independent of government. It's just for the benefit of ordinary people. And we took a little bit of a look at Elizabeth Truss, and she was the former Deputy Director of Reform. Don't worry, because that's independent, Mike. And what sort of people are involved with that? Well, Jeremy Sillam, chair of Bear Stearns International Limited, which I think is a pretty powerful international bank. He was head of the European section of that. And he's got a colleague who's Wallstead Investments Limited. So this is also investment. So she happens to work for Reform, and then she pops across and they make her Lord Chancellor. But it's all independent. Mark, I hope you can understand how we treat independence in UK. We're very serious on it, and I think that probably Hillary Clinton could learn a bit from the way we believe that we should be independent.
Yeah, maybe you could come up with a slogan, independence not, or something to that effect. This, at least in some ways, reminds me of the regionalism and the breakup of ethnic neighborhoods in the United States in the earlier part of the 20th century into the mid 20th century, where in Chicago, for example, ethnic neighborhoods that were organic and formed kind of naturally were broken up. There was urban renewal. Traditional old buildings were torn down. Cheap, modern, ugly edifices were put up in their place. The Frankfurt School's fingerprints could be seen in all of this, in this cultural demolition. So the U.S. has long endured and suffered from and been wounded by breaking up traditional neighborhoods and making artificial regions, regional governments, regional governance, and even dividing the nation longer ago into 12 regions for purposes of the Federal Reserve System. So the U.S. has long been on the receiving end of all this break it up, rebuild, break it up, reform process with much the same kind of connections. Bankers, conflicts of interest, government people operating in surprising places, a lot of parallels, not absolute, but a lot of parallels.
Yep, absolutely right, Mark. We'll say at this stage, what are we going to do about it? Well, one of the things that we've helped create is the British Constitution Group Conference coming up on the 19th of November. That is recognising that the United Kingdom is now a lawless and criminal state, fomenting these overseas wars and conflicts. The aim of the conference is to look at reasserting the rule of law, and we've got some really fantastic speakers, including this gentleman, Colin Canning, who was an RBS banker. He's now whistleblowing on what the international banks are really up to. And of course, we've got our very own David Scott from Northern Exposure, who's actually going to be talking about what it is to be British, what that should really mean, as opposed to the lies and spin that we've all been told. And I'll also bring this up as an advert. We've been told that there's going to be a showing of the updated film version of The Great British Mortgage Swindle, and that'll be at the Savoy Cinema, Derby Road, Nottingham, on the 5th of November at 5 p.m. And so if you're not interested in the traditional blowing up of Parliament for Guy Fawkes Night, are we allowed to say that, Mike, or not?
Don't know.
Probably not. But if you're not out enjoying a bonfire, then what better place to be than having a look at how the banks are swindling us via mortgages?
Well, just briefly, we didn't have to wait till Thursday, as the media was suggesting yesterday, for Mark Carney to tell us how much carnage we could expect. He will stay until the end of June 2019 and no longer, so he won't do his full 8 years, thank goodness. 2019. And that apparently will get us to the end of Brexit. So we'll wait and see how that goes. Well, we have no money, Brian, but we're going to put £2 billion, 1.9 billion to be exact, into cyber defences.
Yeah.
So this is our very own Cyberman here, Philip Hammond, Chancellor of the Exchequer. He's going to boost cybersecurity defences, £1.9 billion investment, because apparently we're being attacked by Russia. So we've got to deal with that. We must keep up with the scale and pace of the threats we face. Our new strategy will allow us to take even greater steps to defend ourselves in cyberspace and to strike back when we're attacked. So there you go.
And they'll be able to defend that that cyber submarine that we're building, apparently. Digital submarine.
Our digital cyber submarine.
Yeah.
Now, are we going to end with Mr. Heseltine?
I think we should, yes. We'll just scroll through a couple of the slides we had prepared, but here he is.
Here he is. I was fascinated by this little story, which has been widely publicised right across the news. And it was only a few lines in the Telegraph here, because he apparently told the Tatler magazine that he had strangled his mother's dog when he was younger, when he was a child, well, a teenager, I guess, Alsatian dog. And apparently he went to stroke him and the dog started to bite him, he says. And he says, if you have a dog that turns, you just cannot risk it. So I took Kim's collar, a short choker chain, and pulled it tight. Suddenly he went limp. I was devoted to Kim, but he obviously had some kind of mental breakdown. And this kind of fascinated me, Brian, and this is purely speculative. I'm not saying this is true, absolutely, but you know, we have long suspected that the media is used by some of these elitists to communicate with each other, and there might be a second meaning, because I don't really understand why this would be a story that Heseltine would particularly want in the mainstream press. So I was just looking at what the analogy might be, and he's talking about you know, being devoted to Kim and mental breakdown. Well, mental breakdown is something that we're being told is a major problem, endemic in the population at large, and certainly politicians increasingly getting worried that the population at large is wanting to bite their hand off at the moment because they're doing the wrong things. And I just wondered if there was a bit of an analogy there, that perhaps it's time for them to choke the life out of the population.
Yeah, if we're the mad dogs.
If we're the mad dogs, yeah.
Are we allowed just to pop this?
Absolutely.
Because I think we should just remind people, of course, this very interesting photograph that the mainstream press doesn't seem to like very much, but it was Mr. Heseltine with Prime Minister Cameron and a gentleman called Matthew Byrne, who was a common purpose leader, paedophile and vicious sex offender.
Really pretty vicious.
Horrific. Look him up in the press if you want to read it. And we just like to ask, where was MI5? Because, of course, our very own boss of MI5, Andrew Parker, has been spouting in the Mail and the Guardian today, saying that he's doing a wonderful job protecting the country. But apparently MI5 had no idea that the vicious paedophile was lurking on the Prime Minister or Mr. Heseltine's sleeve. No idea at all.
None.
No, it's a shame. Mark, just 30 seconds closing comment. Would you like to swap some of your politicians for ours?
Possibly so. A humorist in the U.S. Once said that we pay for all these congressmen to go on foreign junkets, but then they come back. Yes. So if we're going to pay for congressmen to go on foreign trips, we don't want them to come back. We're trying to get rid of them. We're trying to export them as a chief export. So yes, you can have a few. Maybe we'll disorient some of your MPs and have them come here. But
we'll send you Boris, Mark.
Yeah, I want to ask him about his hair. He'd be the youngest Beach Boy, arguably, now at this time. So I want to know about his hair, see if it's real, maybe pull on it a little bit. You know, get to know him, have a few drafts and see what's really going on.
Okay.
Well, we've ended with a smile, which is probably the right thing to do, but we've reported accurate news today, as always. What are we showing? That UK and indeed America, in some instances, descending into fantasy land as a result of these extremely dangerous politicians who were clearly living in their own reality. Mark, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you. That finishes our news for today. If you like what we're doing, please consider subscribing to UK Column or making a donation. We can only do what we do with your ongoing help and support. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.